Let's talk about the formation of a post-Christian culture. Formation of a post-Christian culture. So the secular, our culture, our world, has its own salvation framework. There is a secular salvation framework, and that is that we are people who want the good life, and that good life is to have a certain amount of success. And if we have the certain amount of success, then we have the certain amount of value, and in fact, we have our own truth. And so I know what's right and wrong based on what I believe is right and wrong. And the salvation story that our world tells is if you have a different view of right and wrong, well, you're wrong because it conflicts with mine. And so I can't have any dealing with you if you have something different. And the secular salvation framework has crept in with multiple different channels into the church. Because we have a church, right, who is practicing or participating in all these rituals or habits from the world that is shaping their desires, and all of a sudden, you have a church that looks very similar to the culture, right? And so we've seen that in the past where there's, with the pandemic and things like that all of a sudden, these people who we thought were all in or part of our church now are kind of by the wayside, and we begin to realize, man, what were they really committed to Jesus in this church? Or did over time, they just became look just like the culture? And then something challenged that, and then they just say, hey, my desires, my affections are really for what the culture provides me, or what the secular salvation says I need. What is the meaning of life, and how do I get value in this life? And so you could almost say that our post-Christian culture has done a better job of discipling Christians than the church has. Because our post-Christian culture understands how to shape desires. Like when you look at celebrities and you look at social media, you look at advertisements, companies know that it's not facts that tell you to buy something. It is that they want to give you a story and to help you practice certain rituals and habits to inform your desires so that you buy into to whatever product, to whatever salvation story that they're selling. And then we think that just having people come to church once a month into a building will be enough to help shape their desires, right? Like if they just come to sing some songs, to hear a good message, that they're actually going to be countercultural. And it's like, no, because every day, right? Think about even student ministries. Like this is the big thing in student ministries. It's like, hey, we get one moment with them on a Wednesday night, and yet every other day of the week, they're being told different stories. They are practicing different rituals and habits that are telling them what they should desire, and just 1 hour on a Wednesday is going to help them counter that. It's like, no. Like our culture is doing a really good job at discipling Christians. and so we have to know as a church, how do we do that better? How do we actually help to not just tell people what to believe, but how to help people know what to desire, No one teaches you to become a consumerist. Like, no one sits down and says, okay, class, my oldest daughter's in 4th grade. They're not technically teaching her, hey, Allie, here's how you be a consumerist. You are an American, right? You do live on the East Coast in America. And so in the Western world, you're going to be a consumerist. And here's how you do it. Step 1, step 2. It's like, no, they don't teach that. However, we live a way, it wasn't because someone convinced you intellectually that it was a good idea. Instead, you've been immersed in rituals of the mall, captivated by the powerful pictures that having new things seem to come with this glitz and gleam that is so powerful and so desirable. That's why in commercials, have you noticed that it's hard to tell what a commercial is selling until the very end? Like you see this commercial and it's this perfectly looking couple dancing through the fields with a beautiful mountain backdrop and the wind's blowing, and you're like, what are they selling? Well, first they're selling a story. And the story is, man, you can have this good, awesome life. And then at the very end, it's like, they're selling, a dish detergent, right? Well, from an advertisement perspective, am I convinced now that if I buy this dish detergent, that I will have this good life? And honestly, like, that's what they're doing. That's what they're trying to help shape our desires. We were just talking about the story about, again, brushing teeth. They realized that in order for people to buy their toothpaste, they didn't need facts, right? You can give them scientific facts that, hey, if you don't brush, then you have this plaque buildup, and this plaque buildup then adds to these cavities, and then we have to go in and we have to do this painful procedure. No, toothpaste companies added taste and flavors, so they knew that if we could get people to feel a certain way after they brush their teeth, to feel like it's clean, then we got them. That desire, that ritual, that habit. And so you guys know that when you brush your teeth, it's not the suds or the foam or even the mint that does any of the cleaning, right? But that's what we love. It's like, my mouth feels clean. Whether or not it is, it's a desire. And that's what they realize. They're trying to sell us on a desire that ultimately is informed by certain rituals and habits. So before we realize it, we are now shaped to be a person who loves and desires things. We are now a consumerist before we even realize it. And we know that now the church is filled with consumerists. So now there's like a blurred line between what they experience in culture and now what they expect in the local church. Give me what I want. Give me what I desire. And if you don't, well, depending on where you are, you either make a fuss about it, or you can go to another place that will give you, what you desire. And so I've mentioned this, but here's some secular rituals that we see. First, advertisements. I've talked about advertisements. Companies are brilliant at knowing that it's not about what we know, it's about helping us shape people's desires, and so that's how they build their advertisements. Of course, entertainment, music. I mean, and I feel like I sound really old, but I'm just realizing the music you listen to shapes your worldview, right? So take someone who only listens to country next to someone who only listens to hip hop, right? I don't care what their story or background, they are going to have different worldviews. I'm talking like if they listen to it religiously, like all the time, because both of those genres have very different worldviews. Right, and I do listen to both of those. So I kind of have country, of course, I only listen to on the beach or the lake, right? It's a situational music, right? Hip hop, when I'm running, I need a little bit of that, right? But I know that they have very different worldviews. But if you're consuming that and over and over and over, it is shaping and informing rituals and habits out of a story that ultimately will shape desires. What I want, right? I talked about this multiple times, but I was actually convicted about hip hop music and its portrayal of women specifically, right? So I know what God says and what Jesus has done for the sake of women, to giving them value, to giving them purpose, right? To say that they are created in the image of God, right? They are daughters of the King. And yet I had to contend with the fact that was consistently engaging in music that was giving me a very different message, right? That they were objects to be used for the sake of my pleasure, okay? And so this isn't a critique on a music industry. This is just reality. And so I was faced with this. What am I gonna do with that? And then I was faced with how much internally has subconsciously my perspective on women changed because of the music that I've listened to. I had a really honest assessment of that. And again, I sound like a grandparent. It's like, don't listen to that. But at the same time, there is truth to that. Like, is it truly shaping a story about who women are, their value and their purpose, which then ultimately over time could affect rituals and habits, even on the micro, that then become more macro. And all of a sudden, I make a decision that jeopardizes my family, my faith, my ministry and influence. Where did that start? Well, that started well back, and not realizing how I'm being shaped and formed. Of course, sports, right? Sports, television, cultural figures. I was talking to someone about fashion, and they were saying, are baggy clothes ever going to come back into fashion? And I was like, well, if you're in California, they already are, right? There's if there's this idea of that baggy clothes are now back in fashion. And they're like, well, I don't think it'll ever reach, out here. It'll never come to Virginia, baggy clothes. And I'm like, well, it will, because you don't have to go to California to know the style. You just have to follow a powerful person on social media that you admire, and you have to get enough people following that to know, oh, that's acceptable, and that's cool, and now that's desirable to wear baggy clothes, Jinkos, right? Since some of you don't even, thank you for us older people, Jinkos, right? But the reality is, that's the power. That's why a company will pay a lot of money to have a influential person, whether or not they've done anything of significance, just an influential person to post certain things so that other people say, hey, this is what you want, this is what you need, and practice these certain rituals and habits so that your desires are changed and affected, ultimately so that you buy into whatever thing we're selling, okay? And then, of course, smartphones and social media. There's this idea that the smartphone is similar to a slot machine. Every time you put a quarter in the slot machine and you're waiting for the results, there's a shot of dopamine that kicks in. It's like, oh, and that's why, I did a wedding up in Jersey one time, and it was actually at a casino, long story. They loved Jesus. He just happened to work there, okay? And so I was walking through, and I literally walked through the slot machines, and people are sitting there like zombies, but they're just over and over. Another coin, another coin, another coin. And it's just like, it's like a drug addict. It's like another shot of dopamine. And yet I'm a drug addict, because every time I open my phone, and then I have my couple of apps that I go check, and my alerts, it's like, oh, dopamine, yes, let's go. And so even that, I have, religious level practices and habits when it comes to my phone that is shaping my desires. And I have to be mindful of that. I have to understand what that is. Otherwise, I go on, and all of a sudden, I don't realize to the degree of my worldview has shifted simply because of this device. All of these things make up the secular salvation story, or the post-Christian culture worldview, right? What's the meaning of life? How do I obtain fulfillment? What is the good life? What is truth? And so now, as a church, we're faced with people in our church who have a wide different worldviews, most of which are just very similar to what the culture says. There may not actually be, now I don't have any data, so I'm gonna say something and just say this is really just personal. There may not be a moment in Christian history where there is a wider gap between what we know, meaning that Jesus is the Son of God, the Bible is God's word, Jesus is the only way to salvation, and what we desire. So in the church, and again, I don't know if maybe there's another time where there's been a wider gap between what we know and what we desire, simply because there's been so much access to the things of the world that are shaping those desires, and that the church hasn't met that kind of on the battlefield of helping to know how do we help frame and shape a follower of Jesus' desires.